that Jesus is in control. I don't believe anybody that's watching today would say, I don't believe that. I don't believe that Jesus is in control. The question that we have to ask ourselves, even though we believe it on an academical level, we can think it, do we live it on a functional level? Do we live it in such a way that our life demonstrates that we believe that God rules, that Jesus is in control? Now, it's easy to look around our world today and wonder, if God is in control, what's he thinking? Why is all this going on? Why doesn't he stop the evil? Why doesn't he punish the unrighteousness, or all the unrighteous? Why doesn't he make my life easier? I mean, it's so easy to get caught up in our mortal thinking and our own vision when we start thinking about God being in control and God ruling. But friends, the book of Revelation reveals to us that no matter what happens, no matter what goes on in our lifetime, no matter what goes on maybe after our lifetime, the faithful are going to triumph over evil through the power of God and through faith in Jesus Christ. So yeah, there's hope. And there's a promise. Friends, God is in control. But today I want to look at some things that maybe hinder the fact that keep us from realizing or keep us from living the fact that God is in control. First of all, we have to understand that evil cannot act on its own. Evil does not stand independent. In order to exist, evil has to have an outlet. In order for it to manifest itself, there has to be an outlet. I mean, evil just doesn't become an act. It has to have a host. There has to be an outlet, a connection. Because evil is an influence. It's a choice. Humans choose to allow themselves to be influenced by evil. Notice what James says in James chapter 1 and verse 14. But each one is tempted when by his own evil desire he is dragged away and enticed. Pay close attention. By his own evil desire. So that means evil is much like any other sickness or disease. In order for it to thrive, it has to find a host to influence. You know, sickness and disease, if it can't find a body, it'll die out. Evil's the same way. If it doesn't find a host, it's going to die out. You know, so we have to really think about and remember what James says, that we're tempted by our own evil desires, which means that somewhere along the line, we invited evil into our lives. Now, we might think, well, that can't be. I was raised in a Christian home. I've been a Christian ever since I can remember. I've never invited evil in. Think about the influences in your life. Think about some of the things you've done in your life. Maybe the television shows, maybe the music, maybe the books. All these things we might look at and read about and allow ourselves to be influenced by in some way. Maybe not consciously, but subconsciously. There was a thought put in our mind, a seed planted. And so now within us we have this form of evil. I mean, we may not be evil, wicked people that people look at and say, wow, we got to stay away from them. But there's something in there. There's something in there. I mean, because we have to understand Adam introduced sin into the world. However, we don't have to sin. Sin is a choice. And remember, we've said it many times, we don't sin because we're sinners. We're sinners because we sin. Sin is a choice. We are tempted. Now, being tempted means I can walk away from it or I can give in to it. And so we're tempted by our own evil desires, and that's what makes it such a strong pull, because it's almost like it's a part of me, because it's coming from within. And so when we're tempted because it's such a strong pull. Paul shows that the power of God is greater than the power of evil. In Romans chapter 5 and verse 19, Paul writes, "For just as through the disobedience of one man many were made sinners, so also through the obedience of the one man the many will be made righteous." Now, this isn't saying, it's not teaching the doctrine of original sin. But he's saying because one man disobeyed and introduced sin into the world, virtually every other man since then has done the same thing. If sin was never introduced into the world, we would not be sinners. But since sin was introduced, we are tempted by that sin. But yet, because of the obedience of Jesus to the plan of God, we're made righteous. And that's more powerful. The death of Jesus on the cross conquered sin, conquered death, conquered anything Satan laid out there. God rules. God is in control. Evil is all around us, but we don't have to allow it to be in our lives, or we don't have to allow it to manifest itself in our lives. Notice how Jesus prayed for his disciples in John chapter 17 and verse 15. He says, "My prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one." See, Jesus doesn't want us removed from the world, because we are here for a purpose. We have a mission just like Jesus, to seek and save that which was lost. And we have a purpose as the church to rear Christians, to grow them up into the maturity of Jesus Christ. And if we're pulled out of the world, we can't do that. And so we have to allow ourselves to be protected by the loving arms of God. And he's going to do that. I mean, think about that. Jesus prayed that God would protect us, that God would take care of us. God's power is greater than any influence of evil. And as long as we trust God, we will be protected from the evil one. As long as we put all of our eggs in his basket. We know, we've always heard, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Put them all in God's. That's where you want. And he'll protect you, and he'll trust you. Now, God controls evil. Now, this might sound kind of weird, kind of odd. Because if God controls evil, why doesn't he just do away with it? If he's in control of that, why didn't he just push it out? Well, first, if God was to take away all evil, God was to take away all the negative, well, that would take away free moral agency. We would not be created in the image of God with the ability to think and to reason. We would merely be programmed pieces of flesh with no thoughts of our own, with no choice. And have you ever thought if you didn't know what evil was, you wouldn't know what righteousness really was? If you didn't know what sadness was or depression, you could never really experience joy. God controls evil in such a way that he'll never allow us to be tempted beyond what we can bear. God will not allow evil to overwhelm us in that way. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 13 says, no temptation has seized you except what is common to man. So whatever you're facing, somebody's went through it before you. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. You know, we hear people say quite often, God will never give me any more I can bear. That's a false statement. God will give you more than you can bear because He wants you to depend on Him. But He won't allow you to be tempted beyond what you can bear. He will never allow you to be tempted to the point where you can say, well, I didn't have a choice. Why? Because He always provides a way out. That way you can stand up under the temptation. Now, you may look at a temptation and you may think, well, there's not a good choice. There's not one that I can come out unscathed. Well, the Bible doesn't promise that. It just says there is a way out. There is a choice. See, God knows exactly what we can stand when it comes to temptation, and He's never going to let us go beyond that. Never. That's how much He loves us. And that's how much He's in control of the evil in the world. He can control it in that way. Why? Because God is King of Kings. We know that. We sing about it. We read about it. Again, 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 15. God, the blessed and only ruler, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. What that means is He's higher than anything. He's above all. All authorities are in submission to God and God alone. I mean, the Word tells us that those that rule over us, governors, presidents, anybody in authority over us, receive their power and authority from God. Which means God can take it away. But they are all under His control, whether they recognize Him as their supreme being or their superior or not. He is the one and only ruler, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. There's nothing more powerful than God. And that's the God that's our Father. That we're joint heirs with Jesus, His only, one and only Son. And we're sons by adoption. He's most powerful. And we're part of that family. Now, Satan believes that he possesses power. And to some extent, he does. Jesus referred to Satan as the prince of this world. In John chapter 14 and verse 30, Jesus says, I will not speak to you much longer, for the prince of this world is coming, and he has no hold on me. See, Satan has a hold on the world. But Jesus says he'll have no hold on me. We know a prince has power to a certain extent. But the only power a prince has is under the authority of the king. He's not more powerful than the king. He's not above the king. And we know that God is the Lord of Lords. He is the King of Kings. So therefore, God has control over evil in that sense. Because God is not going to allow us to be tempted beyond what we can bear, Satan cannot make us do anything. We can't say, the devil made me do it. We can say, the devil suggested it, and I thought it was a good idea. But he can't make us do anything because his power is limited by the power of God. John says in 1 John, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. So greater is the king that dwells within you than the prince of this world. So the power that Satan has, where does he get it? From us. We allow him to have it. We allow him to lead us astray. Evil must get permission to act. Did you ever think of that? Evil has to have permission. You know, since we are tempted by our own evil desires, that means that we are asked before we do anything wrong or evil. Like we said, Satan suggests something. He puts that thought in our mind, and it's up to us to deny it or accept it. So, in a sense, we give permission. And believe me, Satan understands. Satan knows how hard faithful people are to shake. He knows when people have a firm foundation, it's hard to get them to fall. And that's where we want to be. We want to have that firm foundation. But what he does, a lot of times when that happens, he just goes around you. Look at it this way. He'll go over their heads to get permission. Luke chapter 23 and verse 31, Jesus says to Peter, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you as wheat. So Satan has approached Jesus about one of his disciples, one of the 12. Was it because Peter was unshakable? Must have been. I mean, we know what Satan did to Judas. But here, Jesus is telling Peter, look, you are going to face temptation. You are going to be tempted to deny me. And Jesus says, I'm going to allow it. I'm going to allow Satan to tempt you. Even though Jesus knew that Peter was going to fall to that temptation. When the temptation came out, Peter was going to give in to it. Because he looks at Peter. Even though Peter says, oh Lord, I'm never going to fail you. I'll never deny you. But Jesus says, Peter, when you return, feed my sheep. Encourage your brothers. When you return. He says, oh, Peter, you're going to fall. You're going to give in to temptation, but you're not going to stay down. You're not going to be permanently in that position. You're going to rise up and you're going to be even stronger than you were before. See, sometimes that's how temptation works. Sometimes that's how sin works in our lives. When we are faithful, when we are depending on God, and we know we have fallen, we're going to get up and we're going to be stronger than we were before. Because we're watching closer. We're more vigilant. And we know the power that Satan can have. I mean, we can learn from Peter. We may fail in standing up to temptation. But just know, Jesus is interceding for you too. He wants you to rise up and be strong as well. To be stronger than you was before. You know, the valleys we travel through in life, those are growing opportunities. We claim to have faith, but if we never have to prove it, what good is it? But when we have to stand on it, it's going to become stronger it's going to become firmer, and our light's going to shine brighter to those around us. I think that Job gives us one of the best illustrations of the power of God over evil. Satan, again, had to go to God to get permission. And in the midst of their conversation, Satan says to God, Job only serves you because you have blessed him so richly. Look how rich he is. Look at all that he has. You've placed this hedge around him. And that's the only reason that he serves you. Satan believed that if God would raise his hand against Job, that Job would fall away and no longer worship. But you know, I always read that, and I'm always amazed by when God looks at Satan and says, have you considered my servant Job? Have you considered his faith? There is no other like him. I mean, can you imagine God looking at you and saying, there's no other like you? But that's the kind of faith that Job had, and God knew the heart of Job. And so he tells Satan, you go ahead, you go down there and you take everything that he's got, but just don't touch him. Take it all. So Satan took Job's oxen, took his donkeys, took his sheep, took his camels, killed all of his children and all but one of his servants. And that was the one that came back and told him all the things that had happened. Notice how Job reacts to all this. At this, Job got up, he tore his robe, he shaved his head, then he fell to the ground in mourning. No, in worship. He fell to the ground in worship. He went through the typical mourning stages of ripping the clothes and shaving the head. That was common. But then he still worshiped God, even though he just lost everything. I always look at that and there was no one like him. Because, man, that would be hard, wouldn't it? To lose everything. It's like the song we sing, "It is well with my soul." A fellow by the name of Horatio G. Spafford wrote that song right after he lost his wife and daughters in a shipwreck as they was traveling to France from the United States. And he wrote, "It is well with my soul." Because he had that faith in God. He trusted in the promises of God. Satan witnessed true faith in Job. But see, this is where it gets tough, because even though Satan witnessed this true faith, he thought Job could still be shaken. He thought his faith could still be taken away. And so he approaches God one more time. And God says, look at Job. Satan says, oh yeah, he may be faithful now, but let me do something to his body. Let me give him a sickness. Take away his health. Then he'll quit praising you. Then he'll lose his faith. God says, do whatever you want to him, just don't kill him. You can't kill him. So this shows the authority that God has over Satan. God gave Satan the permission to take all Job had, then gave him permission to take his health, but he couldn't take his life. So Job gets boils and sores all over his body. I mean, here's this man of society, this man that was of means. Now all of a sudden, he's setting out on the dung heap, scraping his sores with pottery shards. He's an outcast. But even as he's losing his health, his wife says, are you still holding on to your integrity? Why don't you just curse God and die? Look at how Job responds, even to his wife. In Job chapter 2 and verse 10, he says, he replied, you are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept from God the good but not trouble? In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. Job understood that God is in control. He understood that no matter what's going on around him, God was in control. But God ruled. And we know how the story ends. Because of the great faithfulness of Job, he was rewarded with far more than what he had before. It's just like when we fall to that temptation and come back, we got stronger. Job also got stronger. Friends, I don't ever want you to forget, and I don't think you ever will, but I want you to live like it. God rules. We know He's in charge. We look around us and we see things, and we're going to pray about this, and we should. We need to pray about our society, pray about all the things that are going on. That's a good thing to do. But God rules. You know, even though evil may be prevalent, and we are living in the times that Paul talked about, and people are going to call good evil and evil good, we're living in those times. We see that. God is still in control. These are opportunities for us to grow and to lean on God more and more, not on our own understanding. God's promises are still just as true today as they were when the Spirit led the men to write them down for us. They're just as true and just as powerful. Because God's Word is eternal. No matter what you may be facing, I want you to remember that God's watching over you. His arms are around you. Don't push Him away. He will protect you. All you've got to do is trust Him. To trust Him. And know that He's in control. Today you have the opportunity to go to God and let Him know you know that He's in control. Maybe you have failed at temptation. Go back to Him. Let Him lift you up and make you strong once again. Stronger. Like He told Peter, feed my sheep. Encourage one another. Let your light shine brighter. If you need to give your life to God, we can arrange for you to be immersed for remission of sins. Just let us know, and we'll be glad to take care of that. Because, friends, God's in control.
There is